hopeful this will be a very educational and energizing forum and discussion. My name is Michael Deutsch, and I'm from the People's Law Office in Chicago. In September of 1971, immediately after the massacre of 39 prisoners and hostages unarmed, and rehousing of the prisoners, which the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit called an orgy of brutality, a call came out from the National Lawyers Guild for lawyers to come to Attica to assist the prisoners. And many lawyers from all around the country came, and lawyers from the People's Law Office came, and I was one of those lawyers. Relatively brand new lawyer, just 2 years out of law school, and when I arrived 2 weeks after the massacre and rehousing, many prisoners still had not gotten medical care. There were prisoners with broken bones and bullets. The leadership, over 100 prisoners, were locked in isolation. They were constantly harassed and denied basic human rights. And at the same time, the state police was already in Attica, hiding evidence, covering up what happened, and beginning to prepare cases against the prisoners. And it was in those early days that I was at Attica that my interaction with the brothers, meeting them, getting to know them, deeply moved me. Their spirit, their unity, their strength, and their political consciousness really made a difference in my life. And I realized that as a lawyer, if I was going to stand with the Attica brothers, after everything they went through, the crucible of fire, they were like in a war unarmed, that I would have to make a commitment because they could not walk away from this situation. And I made that commitment to stand with the Attica brothers, as did many other lawyers. For the next 4 years, I was in Buffalo, New York, in Attica Prison, which is 40 miles west of Buffalo, working every day with the Attica brothers, trying to help them get out of segregation, get medical care, and most importantly, prepare for the indictments that I knew were coming. Because no prison guard, no state police officer was going to be indicted, and we knew that. We knew there was a cover-up going on, but we didn't have all the information about how that cover-up was going to take place. But we knew that we needed to build some kind of structure that was going to defend the Attica brothers. And over the period of time, we built what was called the Attica Brothers Legal Defense, which was made up of lawyers from Boston, New York, Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, even as far away as California. And not only lawyers, but legal workers and people who were moved by Attica, who came to work together in this huge, old, restored building in downtown Buffalo, where we had legal lawyers working and people working on public relations, fundraising, investigating the jury system. All aspects were working together to deal with the Attica brothers. And of course, the indictments did come. 42 indictments, 60 prisoners, 1,200 felony counts. And not one guard nor one state police was indicted. And for the next 4 years, we worked together, united, to defend the Attica brothers. And our claim was, and our chant was, jail the real criminals, jail Rockefeller and the real criminals, and drop the charges against the Attica brothers. And although we had some beginning trials, ultimately all the charges were dropped against the Attica brothers. A couple of prisoners, a couple of brothers went to prison, but they ultimately got amnesty. And rather than indict the criminals that did the massacre and covered it up, they chose to drop the criminal charges against the brothers after 4 years. And some brothers who were in prison got amnesty after serving some time. And it was those men who really made a difference for everyone who met them. Many of them are gone now. Many of them died. Many of them could not survive after many years. But they really set the stage and set the what we need to do about prisons and how we're supposed to fight on behalf of prisoners. And after the criminal charges were dismissed and amnesty was given to the Attica brothers, we still had an interest in finding out what really happened, and more importantly, suing on behalf of the victims of Attica. And we brought a class action lawsuit, 1,200 people were in the yard, on behalf of the families of the people who were killed, the prisoners who were killed, as well as on behalf of all the people who were shot, tortured, who lost limbs, who to this day, many of them still suffer from post-traumatic stress as a result of what happened to them in DR. And I think when we went to trial finally 20 years later, the civil case, and basically we knew all along that when they decided to storm Attica prison, they knew up front that they were not going to save those hostages. They sacrificed those hostages to put down that rebellion. And because they saw that rebellion was part of the Black liberation movement that they wanted to crush. That's what Nixon told Rockefeller, and Rockefeller told Nixon it was the blacks who were doing this, and it was consistent with what happened before against the Black liberation movement, the counterintelligence program, the destruction of the Black Panther Party, and of course after Attica. If you look at 1972, the prison population began to rise every year since Attica. And I've written something called The Road from Attica, which talks about how Attica was part of this prison incarceration juggernaut, this mass incarceration that we now suffer from today. And it stems from Attica and before Attica. And when we went to trial, we also knew there was a cover-up, that they covered up the killings and they took the evidence and destroyed it. And it was we were never able to prove in court that who killed who shot who, or even the fact that they knew that they were going to be killing their own people when they went into Attica. And even though we didn't have all that evidence, we didn't know about the secret meetings between Rockefeller and the state police who were investigating what happened in Attica. We didn't know about the decisions that were made by the higher-ups to cover up the evidence. We still went to trial, and we still got a partial verdict, and as a result of that, we would have gotten millions of dollars, but the Court of Appeals took away our verdict and said we had to go back on trial again individually for 1,200 potential cases, one by one. And by then we were without funds or resources, so the Attica case was settled for $12 million, including attorney's fees. And I think I owe a great gratitude to Heather Thompson and all the Attica people do, and all of us do, because through dogged investigation and work over many years, she exposed the murders. She exposed the cover-up, and it's her book that lays out in such graphic terms how they went in and slaughtered people with their hands in the air, people hiding under dug out places, people surrendering with gas they couldn't even see in the gas, and they shut down people like ducks in a pond. And it is my great pleasure to have Heather Thompson with us today, and thank her very much for all the work that she's done in this tremendous book that's so accessible to read, that reads like a novel, but really captures what happened and why the state of New York and Rockefeller and the higher-ups were willing to sacrifice their own people to suppress just revolt. Thank you.
Yeah, you don't want me talking without notes. Good evening. Thank you for that amazingly generous introduction, and also for so beautifully laying the groundwork for what I want to talk with you about tonight. First, I want to just make clear how important it is that you have Michael Deutsch here, who first told you about Attica, because I frankly could not have written this book without him and without the Attica brothers themselves. Michael made clear that the state of New York tried to hide and remains dedicated to hiding what happened during this extraordinary human rights rebellion. And had it not been for the brothers' determination to continue to tell their stories, and for very, very specific lawyers like Michael Deutsch, I certainly couldn't have written this book, and I suspect that very few citizens, law students, anyone would know anything about Attica, because the state is so effective at burying its own atrocities. So thank you so much to Michael, also to Alan Mills, who is another one of my heroes, going into these barbaric institutions on a daily basis, and really trying to call attention to what's going on inside and trying to rescue people from it. And of course, I'm grateful to the survivors here as well with me tonight to talk about all this. So normally, when I talk about this book, you should know that this book just got finished. It was released August 23rd, so this is all quite fresh. It took 13 years to do this book. I feel like this is kind of like a reunion seeing Michael. Actually, I interviewed, I don't even know what year that was, back at the People's Law Firm. And that's because, again, there's so many efforts on the part of the state to make sure that nobody could access the documents. So the book, despite the fact that it was very difficult to find out what was going on, is a tome. It's very large. My apologies up front. But that was because I was determined to write down literally everything that I could find out about this. And it turned out that I could find a shocking amount, both from the stories from people who were there, but also through, as I described in the book, some remarkable breaks, some remarkable lucky breaks, where I was able to find documents that the state of New York had no idea were there, and frankly proved everything that Michael just said. Proved things like the governor was absolutely clear that he was going to kill his own men when he went in. The smoking gun documents that named exactly which members of law enforcement had shot which prisoners and which hostages. And so this book is long in part because it chronicles not just the rebellion, but it really spends, I'd say, the majority of the time on the 40-year fallout from that rebellion. It is both a story of extraordinary state cover-up and state police cover-up. Indeed, I want to say it's a cover-up from literally the lowest level of government, you know, the low-level bureaucrat working in a workman's comp office, all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And that's a pretty big statement, but I think you'll see in the book that that's exactly what it reveals. And so I tell you that story in this book, and usually when I do a talk, I walk folks through the entire story, just because I think it's one that everyone needs to know at some point in their life. But today, I want to tell a much briefer version of the story, because I'm really struck today by the fact that we are living in another moment of extraordinary resistance in prison. And you know, my own state of Michigan recently had a really extraordinary uprising in the Kinross facility in the Upper Peninsula, prisons in California, in Ohio, Alabama. If you're paying attention, prisoners are speaking out and erupting again. And what's so remarkable about it is that the media keeps calling me and saying, well, how many? And what's going on? And what's happening? And what I have to keep saying to them is, these are our public institutions, and don't you find it appalling that you can't get any information about what is happening inside of them and what is happening to these human beings inside of them? And so we're in a moment where, in the name of Attica, prisoners across the country are refusing to work. They are sitting down and standing up for justice. And my greatest fear is that, and I think it's absolutely founded given the stories I'm hearing from folks on the inside, is that the repression that is being rained down on them right now is massive. I was on a radio program last week with a brother from Ohio who is now in solitary. They found out that he had talked, and he is now on lockdown. And we just got word that a prisoner inside of the Kinross facility died 4 days ago. We don't know what's going on. He's the third one in a month to die in Kinross. So I decided to kind of talk about something that I think is the most important legacy of Attica, which is the fight. It is about opening the doors, shining the light inside, and making sure that the people inside are seen and heard and recognized. So the book is Blood in the Water, and I promise you that there are many stories, but one of my the one that I think is one of the most important is the story of the legal defense of the Attica brothers, which is a story, it's an amazing story for young lawyers to hear and young law students, and it should inspire everybody in this room. But it's also a legal defense story of the folks on the inside who stand at every juncture and make sure that that defense is theirs as well. So I want to tell you that story. And first, just a bit of background to show you some photographs. So this is Attica, and you can see it's a sprawling facility, and the thing you're going to notice about it is that it is in the middle of nowhere. It is this tiny, tiny town in upstate New York. And frankly, Attica today looks exactly as it did in 1971, which looks exactly as it did during the Great Depression when it was built. And when I went inside of Attica, I was really taken aback because nothing has changed in it. I went up on the catwalks, I could actually see the cement where the bullets had hit. Nothing had been changed in that institution. And that is the same today, although it's arguably more barbaric now. So, what were the issues? What were the issues that led to this quite extraordinary photograph, which is September 9th, the day of the uprising? Well, to be honest, the issues were unremarkable, meaning so common in prisons: horrendous living conditions, forced labor, horrendous living conditions, not enough food to eat, not enough sanitary supplies, barbaric medical care, men inside losing all their teeth because there's no dental care, so they can't eat. I mean, basic, horrendous conditions that these men both tried to mobilize around politically and also tried to, as one poignant sentence in the Attica Liberation Faction's memo said, we want to do this through a democratic fashion. In other words, we're writing to you, come in, change this, do something so that people can actually survive this place. Well, nothing was done. And eventually, folks erupt. And what begins as an eruption out of frustration and actually fear, prison management had made another retaliatory decision to lock these guys in one hallway, and all hell breaks loose. But out of that moment of what many would say was complete chaos and danger, comes one of the most extraordinary, and I mean this, one of the most extraordinary human rights rebellions in American history. And I'm an American historian, and I know about the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries too, and I can honestly say one of the most extraordinary human rights rebellions in American history. Over 1,280 brothers go out into one yard, D yard, and they set up a remarkable community. There are medical stations, as you see in these pictures. There are food stations. The brothers elect representatives to speak for them. Each of the blocks send representatives to the negotiating table to speak for them. And they immediately want the media in there, which is very significant when I think about today's rebellions. Again, the media doesn't know what's going on. The Attica brothers understood, right, that you have to get the media inside because they need to see what's happening. And in addition to bringing the media, they wanted to bring in observers. They wanted to bring in folks to be that liaison between them and the state to make sure that the state would negotiate in good faith. And you'll see some amazing negotiations that go on in this upper left corner for you. You see the Commissioner of Corrections in the left. You see someone who's going to be very important to my story that I'm going to tell you, and certainly to Michael's life here in the dark sunglasses, Frank Big Black Smith. And another Attica brother, many of you know from Eyes on the Prize and various other things you might have seen on Attica, which is L.D. Barkley, who's the tall young man, 21 years old, just to give you some context of who was in here. And of course, L.D. was in there for a parole violation, driving without a license in a maximum security facility in upstate New York. This is Bill Kunstler on the right as one of the observers. So for 4 days, there's incredibly powerful speech-making, work on articulating what the demands are going to be. And at the end of the day, the demands are shockingly basic. Basic things like food, medical care, and so forth. And there's every reason to think that this can go on and that the settlement can be negotiated. And indeed, by the end of this, even some of the most conservative observers are in there, because you can be sure if there were people like Bill Kunstler, the state made sure to put its own observers in there as well. But by the end of it, there seems to be a pretty wide consensus that, we gotta negotiate this thing. So much so that the observers are calling Rockefeller at his lush estate in Conoco Hills and basically begging him to come to Attica so that he can assure the brothers that they can surrender safely. And they're saying, you don't need to come in, you just need to stand outside the prison. Your presence here to endorse their safe surrender. Endorse that you will not retaliate against them, which, by the way, he refused to do. And they use the word massacre. They said, if you don't come, if you choose to take this prison by force, it will be a massacre. Well, this is because they looked outside of their windows, and this is what they saw. During the 4 days of negotiations, every state trooper battalion from around New York descended on Attica. And corrections officers from prisons around upstate New York descended on Attica. And for 4 days, these guys were passing out weapons indiscriminately. They weren't writing down serial numbers. In fact, my research showed a few hapless young troopers who were trying to write down serial numbers, and they were quickly schooled in the fact that that was not what was supposed to happen, and they were told to rip them up. And they're bringing their personal weapons, and they're passing out ammunition that has been outlawed by the Geneva Convention. And for 4 days, these guys haven't slept. They are being fed on a diet of horrendous rumors that my research indicated was coming straight from the FBI, of atrocities that the prisoners inside were committing. And these are the guys who are going to be unleashed on Attica. But not before the state first drops a toxic chemical of CN and CS gas across the yard. And this is a powder. It is sticking in people's nasal passages, in their throats. They are retching, they are throwing it, they are mowed down by this gas. And that's when the troopers go in. And that's when corrections officers go in. And in 15 minutes, when everybody is already subdued, it is an absolute shooting spree. And what is the result? The result is carnage. Forgive me for these pictures, I won't dwell on them, but I will tell you that these pictures indicate a fraction of what the carnage was. The title of my book is Blood in the Water. That comes from one of the brothers who testifies many, many years later, and he says in sort of wonderment, when he looks up from all this shooting, all he can see is blood in the water. It's also, of course, it's its own play on George Jackson's Blood in My Eye. So what happens? Well, the state of New York steps out in front of the prison and tells the world that something completely different happened. It tells every reporter assembled there that the prisoners had killed the hostages. They slit their throats. One of them has even castrated a hostage. And when asked by the media, well, you know, are you sure? Do you know? Yes, we saw it. In fact, one of the prison officials says, we even have film of it. Never, ever happened. But that has going to have a profound effect. I say in my book that this becomes part of the emotional energy that this nation is going to need to drive this mass incarceration that we're going to eventually get. This idea that prisoners are no longer deserving of human rights is very much fueled and fomented in this moment of how Attica was spun. And so you can imagine, not only is the nation told that the prisoners have killed the hostages, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but if there's going to be an investigation, it's all going to come raining down on the prisoners. And that's exactly what happens. As Michael explained, 62 surviving prisoners were indicted, 42 separate felony indictments. And I'm going to leave aside this issue of the case for just a moment, but just to point out that imagine a situation where you've got investigators that are building cases against prisoners, and some of them, many of them in the first months, are the same men. They are the same state troopers that actually did the retaking, actually did the assault on the prison. In other words, they allowed the state police to investigate this thing. And so they essentially terrorize many prisoners into testifying. I talk all about that in the book, and it's a really shocking story of abuse of investigative authority, abuse of prosecutorial authority. But that's what I really want to focus on is what then happens, which is the incredible mobilization of young lawyers and activists around the country on behalf of these men. It begins actually from the instant that Attica happens. There's already people there mobilizing, but when the prison has such a brutal assault, folks descend even in greater numbers on Buffalo and begin demanding access to the prison. Again, I want you to think about today and think about all of these prisons where this stuff is going on right now, and just not going away and trying to file injunctions and trying to get into the door. And eventually the media, after it has egg on its face, it's reported this atrocity that never happened, they also start pushing, to get access inside. But this kind of mobilization is profoundly important, because what it means is that when these cases that the state is trying to make against the prisoners go to trial or about to go to trial, they're going to have their hands full. The state is going to have its hands full because of the most, and just like I said, this was the most important human rights struggle in the 20th century. It was also the most important legal defense effort of the 20th century. And I would say as important as the defense of the Scottsboro Boys, which is a very meaningful reference point for people. So what did it look like? Well, as Michael says, the National Lawyers Guild was central to this, sending young law students and lawyers from all over the country to Buffalo to engage in this defense effort. It's the formation of the Attica Brothers Legal Defense. And the book talks about this multi-pronged, fascinating strategy to defend the brothers. First of all, the very premise that every single brother needed to have representation. And not that these lawyers would all speak for the brothers, but that they would have representation. And in fact, most of the brothers insisted on being pro se as well, standing with their lawyers, strategizing with their lawyers, and indeed helping to figure out what that legal strategy should be. They also had a strategy of blizzarding the prosecution with motions. Motions. And there's a very hilarious part of the story, I thought, where essentially the state prosecutors are really furious because there's so many papers showing up that they have to be basically trolleyed in. And then, of course, they're expected to, with discovery, continue to do Xeroxing for all of these lawyers, right? There's like 62 indicted people. They all have lawyers, or one, or two, or three. So it's an amazing story of using the law, understanding the law, and using it in a really effective way to keep the state on its toes. Also, great investigative work. This is an incredible moment where the Attica brothers go out and actually interview the National Guardsmen who were brought in to do medical triage, and interview the doctors, some of whom were so horrified by what they saw in Attica that they will come to testify when Michael is waging this battle in the civil courts 20 years later. And all of this is recorded. All of this information is there at the disposal. There's also amazing PR work, making sure that all the people living in Erie County know what's happening to the brothers, and whether or not they would be immediately sympathetic, trying to make them understand what was really going to be happening to them, what was really happening in these criminal trials. A jury project, which was incredible, trying to figure out, how could you get a jury that was genuinely fair or representative of the person on trial. Community work, mobilizing in the community, and trial prep. And the one thing I want to say about that, it had to always be this kind of interesting mix of a legal strategy, right? Get your P's and Q's and dot your I's and understand the law and make it work for you. But it was also political work. It was also being clear at all times what had just happened, being really clear at all times what the state had just done, and being real clear who the perpetrators of the violence in Attica had been. And that was a very powerful defense cocktail. These moments, of course, were all going to culminate in, as Michael says, only a few trials, or remarkably few trials, because this was so effective. And in only one of them were there convictions, and that was for the killing of a guard who was overrun in the first initial moments of the riot. And that case, which you'll read about in detail, is so striking because, of course, in this case, they were a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old defendant, both of whom were about ready to get out. One of whom was only there on a parole violation. The state had no idea who had killed this guard, but they were going to marshal every resource they had to get a conviction. And this was the one time they did. One of the guys was defended by Bill Kunstler, the other by Ramsey Clark. It's an incredible trial story. It's an incredible story of how justice does not win always, even when there is an amazing defense. And then there was the trial of Bernard Strobel, known by everyone as Shango. And that was the trial that really, at the end of the day, kind of shocks the state, because they just won a conviction, and they have this trial, and they lose pretty dramatically. And I just want to and I'm going to wrap this up, just one quick reading from the book to give you a flavor of that trial at the very end. Shango was defended by a Detroit, I'm going to tell a story because I'm a Detroiter, by a Detroit attorney by the name of Ernie Goodman. And Ernie Goodman and Shango developed a friendship, but also a trial strategy together to defend him against a very brutal murder case. And it's chronicled in this book, but at the very end, they get an acquittal. And I want to just tell you this moment, though. It's right after the acquittal, when they stand outside of the courthouse. When Ernie Goodman, Hayward Burns, and the rest of Shango's defense team walked out of the courtroom into the dark summer night, they were met by scores of ABLD, Attica Brothers Legal Defense, supporters, who cheered and applauded them as they walked down the stairs. Goodman was overcome. It was a remarkable feeling, he remembered. It was a defense that had been able to jointly overpower the state without money, with little expertise, and yet had been able to bring some kind of justice to that courtroom. Everyone assembled felt an integral part of that victory, and a chant began to grow louder all around the courthouse. Attica means fight back, and then Attica means from the street, and slightly muffled, but still powerful, fight back from inside of the Erie County Jail, where many Attica brothers still sat awaiting their trials. And that theme of fight back is what this night, I think, is about. These are some of the brothers in the trial, but these are also the people who are there to support them. And fighting back mattered. The state tries then to shut it all down. There's a whistleblower. He points out that this has all been rigged from the beginning. They should have been going after police. They didn't. To make a very long story short, that's the whole cover-up part of the book. That's another 100 pages I don't have time to tell you about. But here's the thing, the fight back part of it takes us to that guy that I showed you in the first slide with the sunglasses, Frank Big Black Smith. He is an Attica brother who isn't about to let all of the state trauma be swept under any state rugs. And that's because the shooting that I outlined, the 128 people that had been shot so severely that they were maimed and scarred and traumatized for life, some of them 6 and 7 bullet wounds, that was the beginning of the nightmare in Attica. Because what happened after that, as Michael and his fellow attorneys and Attica brothers proved in a court of law, was that orgy of brutality. For days and months and weeks, the state police and corrections officers tortured the men on the inside of Attica. This is, again, I can barely dwell on this, but this is Frank Big Black Smith on the table. He has a football under his neck, and he is tortured for hours and hours and hours, and told that if he drops the football, they will kill him. They, sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. Wait, sorry. And so he and many of the other brothers who are so tortured have never forgotten this, and indeed, even in the immediate aftermath of Attica, had filed a case to try to bring this story to the public, a civil rights story to the public and to the court in a class action suit. But they weren't allowed to pursue it because the state told them that none of this could be pursued until the criminal trials were wrapped up. And of course, by then, right, people are broke and traumatized and, dissipated, and this case is still out there and people are trying to keep it alive. But basically, we have to fast forward all the way to the 80s before this case can be resurrected, not because people had forgotten, but because it was incredibly difficult to fight a civil case that has just been moved to upstate New York, when so many of the brothers, for example, were from downstate in New York City. And I won't belabor the story because Michael did a much better job than I am telling you what it was, but it is a jury trial where upstate jurors, thanks to the trial work of Michael Deutsch, Elizabeth Fink, Joe Keefe, and of course to brothers like Akil Ojunde, Herb Lyden, and Frank Big Black Smith, they persuade this jury in no uncertain terms that atrocities have occurred, that civil rights injustices have happened, and that there is liability. It's going to take a long time after that for them to get to the damages trial, but as Michael says, they do get damages, so many damages that the state of New York would have had to make good on those damages. Frank Big Black Smith was the high end of the damages, $4 million just for him. And they said, whoa, no. And so it goes up on appeal, and basically they're sent back to the drawing board, as Michael explained. So this leads to this historic settlement in 2000. This is, again, Big Black on the left in the court, and this is Liz Fink with the brothers after the trial. A remarkable indication of the power of grassroots mobilization and working in solidarity to get these stories told. I'm going to close there and just say that there's so much more we can talk about Attica, that we should talk about Attica, but my point in talking about it in these terms today was to talk about why this matters, and particularly with so many, I know, dedicated law students and lawyers in this room. A lot of times my students, I'm a historian, but my students look back on the 1960s. We have a rash right now in Michigan of these tremendously racist posters going around, and black students are trying to mobilize, and people have been just not sleeping. It's been an incredible mobilization moment. But my students get really depressed and they say, I wish this were the 60s. Because then we'd really be able to get some stuff done. I wish this was the 70s, man. We're like, we are just swimming uphill, or we're we're climbing uphill, we're crawling uphill, swimming upstream. And I think that sometimes young lawyers feel this way too, like, slogging it out and filing the motions and doing that, maybe going to the prisons day in and day out. And certainly the survivors feel like this, right? Like, how are we ever going to bring this stuff to justice, or at least bring it down a notch? And so Attica reminds us that the fight is worth fighting. And it reminds us that while it might not be justice, it's a hell of a lot closer to some form of justice than would have existed without that fight. And if nothing else, that story for justice got a whole lot of really important stories told, and I want us to hopefully listen to those stories, so that today when we see Florida and Alabama and Michigan and California, and frankly, all of those places where the survivors inside, the men and women inside, aren't rebelling, not because they don't want to, not because they don't need to, but because they're on lockdown 24/7, and because they're tased if they even think about it, or gassed if they even consider it. We gotta open those doors and shine that light inside, and remember that Attica shows that people do indeed have victory when they fight back, and that Attica does indeed mean that there is a possibility of victory. Thank you.
We're going to have an opportunity to ask questions and comments, but we're going to try and shift the focus a little bit now to what's going on today in the prison rights movement. And our first speaker is somebody that really has been involved on a day-to-day level, representing prisoners, suing the prison system, and I think he'll be giving us an overview of what's going on. And then we have two ex-prisoners who are going to speak. So the first speaker is Alan Mills.
I guess I'm thanking you, but I have to offer Heather, so I'm not sure I can do that. Very little top set story. But so I work at the Uptown People's Law Center. We're on the north side of Chicago. It's a small community-based legal clinic. We have a total of 6 people, only 2 of us are lawyers. And we really got into the prison system because the people who founded the Law Center, which was not me, thought that people who were in the prison system and people in the community were the same people. It's not like there's one group of people in prison and another group in the community. They go in and out all the time. Poor people from Uptown go to prison, prisoners come back out and come to the community. So the people that founded the Law Center believed in their hearts that it was all one community, and wherever you had a legal problem, they were going to address it. Whether it was your landlord abusing you or whether it was a prison guard abusing you, it was still our problem to solve. So we started, actually, where I met Brian, with a case many years ago. We filed in 1982 on behalf of some prisoners at the old Joliet prison built before the Civil War, who were stuck down in what was then solitary there. It was known as the Tombs, because it's where they sent prisoners to be buried. It had big 6-foot thick limestone walls, which sweated like anything in the summer and iced over in the winter. And they filed a complaint with the court. And it was a long, rambling complaint, didn't do a very good job of it, but this is the prisoners acting their own. But I had one sentence in there saying we can't get to the court, we can't get to the library to figure out what we're supposed to do. And so we took that case on and expanded to the whole state, saying that prisoners throughout the state of Illinois in solitary couldn't get to the law library. That case went on for 18 years, and ultimately we lost. Ultimately, the 7th Circuit ruled that we never should have brought the case in the first place, and that our guys didn't try hard enough to get to the law library. But despite wasting sort of 18 years of my life, I decided this is really what I wanted to do. That the conditions I found were bad, but much more importantly, and this is really what Heather said, the people I met inside were some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. One of them sitting here, Brian, was a witness in that case. Actually, he was a lot younger than and a lot thinner than and had hair. As did I. But so we've been working on this issue of solitary conditions forever, and it's not getting any better. It's worse now than it's been when I started. And in many ways, Heather said, it's worse now than it was when Attica got started. So to bring it up really to today, this morning in the Sun-Times, Governor Warner published a op-ed. And one of the things he announced was he's closing F House, the big round house at Stateville, the last panopticon. If I remember German from back in the 18th century. It's the last one left, and it's a horrible place to be. It was built in the 1920s. And by 1924, people were saying this is a horrible place. By 1970, the state had its own study saying it's time to close this place, it's falling apart. Instead, and this is a year before Attica, instead, Attica happens, the mass incarceration really takes off, and that's why Attica for me is so important. And instead of closing F House, they double up the number of people they put in. All those cells that used to be single cells, and those are tiny cells, smaller than the ones you could see at Attica. They put 2 people in each of those cells that was designed for 1. Not only did they put 2 people in it, but instead of just being a place to sleep, you were locked in there 22 to 24 hours a day because we also eliminated all the programming. And really, that's what happened as a result of Attica, not the uprising. What the uprising showed was that prisons are terrible places and people will make great sacrifices to change it. But because of what Heather described, the demonization of the men who participated in the uprising, the labeling of them as murderers. And one of the parts of your book that I found most amazing was the surveys they did of people up there who were liberals, who said, yeah, I think the prison conditions are terrible, but even after some of these facts came out, said, but these guys went way too far. They're murderers. It was never appropriate to kill guards in order to improve your conditions. And they didn't. But nonetheless, that was what stuck in the public mind, because that was the initial narrative that was put out, not by the prisoners, but by the powers that be. And it was very intentional that it was put out. Remember, it was a year after Attica, less than a year after Attica, that Governor Rockefeller put in his Rockefeller drug laws, which was the beginning of locking up more and more people for simple drugs. It was the beginning of truth in sentencing, where people couldn't get out through good behavior anymore. It was the end of indeterminate sentencing, which happened in 1981 in Illinois, earlier other places. So that people, even if they behaved wonderfully and they were fully rehabilitated, still had to spend decades in prison. So it didn't happen until today that F House finally got closed down. Not until today. We currently at the Uptown People's Law Center have 9 class actions filing against the Department of Corrections. Medical care in Illinois is among the very worst in the country. We spend about 1/5 per prisoner of what California spends. And California is the state that the Supreme Court a couple of years ago held was so bad, so unconstitutional, that the only remedy was to release prisoners because they were so overcrowded. We spend 1/5 of that. So if theirs was unconstitutional at 5 times what we spend, imagine how bad ours is. And it is bad. People lose their legs because they have diabetes and they don't get treated. People die of cancer when they're diagnosed with arthritis, and all they're given is Tylenol. We have a mental health case. People are not treated who have serious mental illnesses in the Department of Corrections. And it's a lot of people. By its own records, the Department of Corrections admits that we have 11,000 people in Illinois, out of our total of about 45,000 in prison, who are seriously mentally ill, who need treatment. They're not getting it. They're locked in segregation because that's all we have to do is to lock them away and hope they don't kill themselves. We have a case about parole. Parole being revoked without due process. You would think if you're outside and you're facing the threat of going to prison, you get a lawyer. That's the way most people think. It's not true in Illinois. The Supreme Court decided 40 years ago you're entitled to a lawyer appointed by the state, but the state of Illinois has never appointed a lawyer to represent any prisoner, juveniles, mentally ill, anybody hasn't gotten a lawyer. Instead, they're sent back to prison on technical violations, being late for your parole check-in, not enrolling in a substance abuse class when you try, but they're all full. You don't have a chance to put on defense because you don't have a lawyer to accompany. So, I want to say that what Rockefeller and the other, and Nixon and the FBI did worked. It convinced the public that prisoners don't deserve anything. And I think it's our job, particularly as lawyers, but as public who knows what went on in Attica, who knows what's going on today, to have the same outreach to the public to let everybody know what's really happening inside of our prisons. Who's in prison? Why are they there? What are we, the public, doing to them? And that, to me, is less than that. It's the organizing piece. What's really amazing to me, what we didn't talk about, is, and you showed the one sign of the tickets, but there were thousands of people who marched through New York City carrying coffins on their shoulders to mourn and to organize. This defense committee, to organize. We don't have that structure in place today. I can't imagine 10,000 people marching down Michigan Avenue today if something were to go wrong and stay them. But we need to build that kind of an organization out there. We need to let people know that we have a human rights crisis in our prisons. You don't have to go to Guantanamo. You don't have to go to Abu Ghraib. All you have to do is go down the street to Stateville, and you will see people being tortured in our name. And we need to build something that will put a stop to that.
In 1978, there was another uprising in Pontiac prison, and it turned out to be the largest death penalty case of the brothers who were involved in it. 17 brothers were charged with death penalty case, and there was a coming together of lawyers and organizers. And actually, there's going to be an event tomorrow to talk about the Pontiac case. But we're lucky enough to have with us one of the Pontiac brothers. Benny Lee, who was supposed to come, couldn't make it. But we have Albert Jackson, who's going to talk about his work with the Pontiac brothers and after that. Thank you.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to come out tonight. It was unexpected, but I'm glad to be here. And I want to thank everybody for coming out, simply because time is the only thing that we can't get back, okay? And so I won't take a lot of time. There's so much that I would like to say, but not in this particular forum here. I'm going to reserve the majority of it until tomorrow. I just want to start out by saying that I'm a person, I grew up in Argyle Gardens. It's the second oldest project in the city of Chicago. In late 1968, I joined the Black Panther Party. As a youth, I saw a lot of police brutality. I was always one of those children that was always curious, and I was always reading. And I hung out with a lot of older guys, and my mom was always on me about stop hanging with the older guys. But a few of those guys that I was hanging with, they had been exposed to police brutality and had been a part of the criminal justice system itself. And so these were early influences on me, seeing the police brutality and then seeing the discrimination. At the time, I didn't know that it was racism. Okay, and so I joined the Black Panther Party at the age of 15. And I was very, very dedicated to it. This is when the Vietnam War was going on. And I know they were recruiting people, well, the draft, that is. Once you got a certain age, I believe it was 17, and you were eligible going to the military. But I already made a decision at an early age that I wasn't going to fight for this government because I had a little knowledge about what happened with Muhammad Ali, you know, and so I had made the stance because I was reading things that I should have not been reading, meaning that it wasn't approved by my mom. So I made the decision then I wasn't going to the military. And so I joined the Black Panther Party. I was dedicated to it. And I believe that what we did was correct. The things that are happening today, as you all know about that murder of Laquan, he got shot 16 times. And the work that I do today, when I talk with people, I tell them Laquan is not the first person. You see, there's always been a war going on, and this war against black men and brown people and poor whites, particularly those in the Appalachian Mountains, who most people don't even know about. And they live in abject poverty there, you know. So during the time, so in 1970, Bobby Rush, the present congressman, he purged everybody from the Black Panther Party. Some of us formed underground movements, but the original Panthers, many of us didn't go back. I went back to my old neighborhood, Orville Gardens. We told everybody that was selling their heroin. We told them if you're selling their heroin, you got to stop. So just to make a long story short, one of my friends ended up getting killed, and that's how I got my entry into the criminal justice system. I went on the run. Now, I will say this. I was very aware of what happened in Attica before I got locked up. When I go back, when I see the clippings and I see what happened, everything just comes to in 1971. And so I knew that going into this particular system, I knew there would be a long, hard struggle, and I didn't know if I would even make it out again. So going into the prison system, I was, unlike so many other prisoners that have entered the Department of Corrections here in Illinois, many of them go in ignorant. And I do say that, people that say, well, why do people go to prison, and then they change, some of them come out, they want to be preachers, things like this. Here it is because when you get there, you have an opportunity to sit down and think. See, and in my talks that I do today, I say the difference between the so-called criminal today and back then is that, see, you didn't have TVs and radios. You had a more intelligent criminal going into the prison system. And you also had programs in the prison back then. So when they were there, they could educate themselves, get a trade, and then come out and then be productive. All that's gone. But today they got the TVs in there and the television that we know is no more than a programming device. Okay? And we have people today, we have people spending 8, 9, and 10 hours in the TV. They're working jobs on the TV. And the people in power, nothing comes to Hollywood except it gets approved by the Tapestry Institute. And as long as they know that people in the television and artificial reality, as long as you're in the television, you can't solve the problems out here. And so there's so much work to be done. And if we're waiting around, waiting for people to get with you may as well forget it. And see, that's what the vanguard is all about. See, the vanguard is those few people that go out front. See, I'm not quite sure many of us, it doesn't have to be in this, but any fight that you take, you might have had opportunity where you had the chance to work with people, and then you say, okay, we're all going to do this, and then when it's time to do it, nobody's there but a few people. Okay, and that's the way it is now. We cannot wait around for people to make up their minds what they're going to do. Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now because the clock is ticking. You see, and people are suffering. The people are suffering. And so I want to say that prison, we had an opportunity to meet Nick Black. He came to counsel us, and beautiful brother, powerful and strong. We got a lot of strength from him. And so we look to that Attica prison ride. Our struggle, our fight was based on those same guidelines. We pretty much did the same thing, but had that not happened, it would have been kind of difficult because the lawyers that came forth, some of them were part of the Pontiac prison riot, And so 17 of us were indicted on 15 counts of murder. I'm just so grateful that many people were saying that we were going to turn on one another and like that, and it never happened. We stuck together. I just want to say that total experience, you can never underestimate the power of the people that they were talking about. In the Attica event, where we had all type of people that were marching, but you didn't get a lot of media play. You see, from that, but we had so much support, and I'm grateful to everyone, past, present, and now, who know about the experience, who contributed to the experience in whatever way that they could. Today, I did 25 years. I didn't think that I would get out. The conditions at Pontiac were very, very deplorable. Okay, but today I've been out 20 years. I have 21 years out. I made it a point because, like I said, But you know, I'm one of Malcolm's children, and I just like he did state and reiterate time and time again, America's prison. You know, and you know, racism. Let me say that racism it is very, very difficult to talk about. And when people try to talk about it, they don't want to talk about it. You know, you keep pushing this stuff up under the rug, and these piles get bigger. Well, this is one of the reasons why I have so much respect for the comedians, because they do try to break the ice through their comedy. We got to try to do something. You know, we never lived life before, so we have to try things new, keep our minds open, you know? And like I said, I work for TAS. I've been with TAS for going on 20 years. I came in as a case manager, and I've case managed literally thousands and thousands of prisoners, of people who have caught cases. And when I talk to them, like many other case managers who are not conscious, they might mention criminal justice system, but I say criminal justice system also, but I reiterate prison industrial complex, because it is an industry that feeds bodies based on race. It's no accident that these prisons all over this country are filled with black, brown, and a few poor whites. See, and this stuff, it has to change, because as we look forward to America's future, the dollar is on its way out. It's going to happen in the next few years. America's already lost its reserve status in terms of the world currency, and we're going to feel the effects of that. And you can look for a heightening of the prison population and more injustice in those prisons as the economic conditions get worse. You know, and I mean, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but when I think about these things, I think about the people who are trapped in that system there. And when funds get cut, you can see it now when the budget cuts took place. Well, not the budget, but the budget fight with the governor and the mayor. Many treatment facilities were forced to close. I have a gentleman, a client, two of them right now, they're addicted to heroin so bad, and they do need treatment. And I was just told today that they would not be able to get that treatment, a 90-day treatment program, because the funding is not there. And so, like I say, I deal with thousands of people. I've saved a lot of lives. This is what I continue to do, even outside. And another thing that I see too, whether it's TAS, whether it's Safer Foundation, many of these HRDI, many of these other places that do social services, many of the people that work for these places here, some of them have strong views in terms of the criminal justice system and the human rights issues as it regards prisoners. But most of these people, they'll do the job while they're at work. No, not to me, they're not going to do anything after 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock when they get off. And see, these problems are so severe that we just can't depend on an 8-hour job, you know, to try to get this work done. We have to make a sacrifice, at least spend, if it's no more than an hour out of the week, you know what I'm saying, to step outside yourself and use some of that time, you know what I'm saying, to say something to someone. I talk to people of all different ethnic groups and backgrounds. I don't even have to know them, but I have good human relation skills, and then I understand the issues, and I will bring up issues that I know that affect all of us as human beings, because we all have to live together at the end of the day. You know, whatever happens in this country, we're all here together. And so it's all our problem. You know, it's not just a suburban problem, because you're going to find out that those problems in the city, you see them coming out to the suburbs, and we kind of see that now today. So I don't want to be too long, because I didn't have a structured talk, but we have to educate people as best we can. You know, and sometimes I try to talk to young guys. I tell them all the time about putting their pants up. You know, you have to be flexible in your dress. Don't be just a gym shoe boy here. Put a suit in your repertoire. You know, and so it's a hard fight. That's what we put on this planet for. And so, having said that, I just want to say I'm grateful to see Michael Deutsch again. I'm grateful for your comments. I'm grateful for the people here. And I'm hoping that some of you all will come out tomorrow and hear what we have to say. And we're going to continue to struggle. All power to the people.
Our last speaker is Brian Nelson, who spent 23 years in solitary confinement, 12 years in TAMS, the high security special prison, and he is a lack of health survivors experience. Brian.
I got out of prison June 10th, 2010. And I started working at Uptown People's Law Center January 2011. My job is a prison rights coordinator, where I get approximately 150 letters every week directly from prisoners in the state of Illinois, and then there's stacks of letters from other law firms that prisoners' rights. So why is Attica important? This is what's happening in Illinois. 85% of the men in solitary confinement are Hispanic or minorities. 85% of the men in solitary confinement are there indefinitely. 50% of them men have been in solitary confinement for over 10 years. There's men in Illinois that have been in solitary confinement since 1983. Most of the prisons in the state of Illinois are in the southern part of the state. And the shock value that hits a prisoner when he gets off the bus is the language. My God, boy, what are you doing in our prison? Get your nose up against the wall. What happened in Abu Ghraib, that the whole world watched with the stress positions, has been happening in Illinois prisons for 3 years. We have filed a lawsuit about it. Men are being raped with oak sticks. They're being forced to stand in stress positions 4 to 8 hours, and if they move, they get beat, dragged off, and thrown in segregation. Not isolated incidents. We're talking about 100 guys a month happening. And individuals that are doing this are Southern white correctional officers that were in the National Guard overseas that came back and brought the tactics here. September 5th, was this 2013 in Stateville Correctional Center, some inmates were in line to go to the child. One of the guys had just had surgery on his Achilles tendon and he didn't walk fast enough. And the way the disciplinary reports were written, these 5 Hispanic inmates jumped on Lieutenant Best, beat him up along with other employees. When the investigation was done, after 3 of these guys had been criminally charged with this, all of them placed in segregation, the videotape was revealed. Not one inmate touched an officer. Instead, Lieutenant Best punched the guy in the back of the head that couldn't move fast enough, and on tape, he said, "Get these damn sticks, I'm tired of them." And this all came out on videotape and in lawsuits. This is what's happening in all my prisons every day. And when you've got somebody sitting there with a sentence of natural life for 30 years or even 1 year, and you racially demean them all day, every day, when you make them feel they have no worth, where you're just a dumb idiot and you're here to repent and do your punishments and be beat down as you look at the officer. And that's the biggest thing. If you put your eyes up at that orange crush officer, they will beat you with a oak stick. And this is the Department of Corrections policy, and it's called nut to butt, which means when you're walking in line, you have to hold the testicles of the person behind you. Your forehead has to be on their shoulder blades, and if you get out of that position, you will be beaten and thrown in segregation indefinitely. Every day this happens in Menard, Big Muddy, Lawrence, and all these prisons in Illinois. When's the last time you heard about an inmate being beat to death? You heard about police shooting them? March 13th, an inmate in protective custody in Pontiac Correctional Center was beaten to death because he would not kneel on the floor and put his face against the bars. He said no. So they beat him. And in the process of it, an officer kneeled on his neck and snapped his neck. Well, you know how much media there was? None. Not one word. This is going on in Illinois prisons every day. And correctional officers that I run into that I know that at the time would be like, why are you talking so bad about us? You're one of us. And that's what they're mistaken. They're thinking I'm white, that I'm an idiot. I'm not no idiot. I'm not one of them. I'm a human being. And if we don't stand up and look what's happening to these men in prisons, we're going to have another act. Or we're going to have such angry individuals coming out of prison that they can never be a part of society again. So many men are coming out. They're on Social Security for the rest of their life because they've been destroyed. I've got friends in this room that can't hold a job because of what the state did to us in solitary confinement. We had no TV, we had no radio, we had no human contact. When I came out of my cell, nobody else could be out in that prison anywhere. Roosevelt was there with me, Greg was in solitary with me, and we were beat down psychologically. And when we come out, we get a job. So now you pay for me to be in prison because I did something wrong. I get out of prison, I get free housing, I get free medical care, and I get $750 a month from Social Security. Because you screwed me up in prison, not because I have a mental defect when I went there, or when I come out that bad. And here's the other part, this is happening to the women. We represent a young lady that was so mentally disturbed, they put her in solitary confinement. Nobody could talk to her. They wouldn't treat her. You know, they just ignored her for years. And the day she's released, they want to put her in a hospital because she's mentally ill. Oh, aren't you supposed to treat her while she's inside? Isn't that what the law says? Well, why did you do it? And as taxpayers, we should be involved. It screws me up. I'm paying for my friends to be tortured because of my tax dollars. I have no way to stop my tax dollars from being used. I got a friend, Dan Johnson, that's been in solitary confinement since 1988. Francisco Rojas since 1983. They got no tickets. They did not violate the rules. They're in administrative detention, which means basically they're just there until somebody decides to let them out. They did the same thing to me. 12 years straight, and on the day of my release from solitary confinement, he pushed me out the door. Then they said I had to have a reintegration evaluation. This is my adequate report. They wanted to make sure they didn't screw me up so bad mentally in solitary that I wasn't going to come out here and kill everybody. I had to see a psychiatrist, otherwise I was going to be civilly committed for the rest of my life for what they did to me. As taxpayers, that should call us. These are human beings. These are our next door neighbors. If I'm not in love with you, you wouldn't know this about me. I mean, and there's people in this room that have done time. When do we stand up as human beings and realize every life matters, every person matters? Doesn't matter about race or religion. And why does that matter? Because the correctional officer's lives matter. Just like the inmate's life matters. And the next convict's life matters. And it's one benefit I do have since I've been out. I can thank the great lawyers that stood up for me. Alan, Joey, all you guys that stick up for us everywhere. I get to say thank you for us because when we're inside, you don't get to meet the lawyers all the time. We don't know them. You know, and without the lawyers and the people that do care, we have no hope. And that's when I killed myself inside. And they wouldn't let me go. And they bring me back and say, and then we gotta explain why you killed yourself. You know? So that's why that matters. The evolving standard of decency. We're still right back there at that same stage. Terrible food, no jobs, horrific living conditions, uncontrolled beatings and racism. We're still there. Nothing has changed. Until we stand up and force a change. And that's why it matters. Thank you for the book and thank you all.